Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me on my drive to work. My name is Nick, and today the topic I've managed to pull out of my brain is that of drug use. And I know not a fun topic for a lot of people, and that's fair. But the good news is I do have some hospital stories that I can relate. But obviously, the overall thesis here is drugs is bad. Um, But how bad is drugs, really? I know that there's probably plenty of you out there that, maybe you've used some marijuana, and maybe you use alcohol regularly. That's technically a drug. And of course, there's pharmaceuticals that are therapeutic in nature, and that's perfectly fine. But obviously, I'm here talking about, you know, drugs that people use recreationally. And for the most part, I will admit that marijuana, it's not the evil that certain people would have you think it is. I've never used it myself. I have no desire to use it. But I fully accept that it has some therapeutic benefits, and honestly, recreationally is probably not even as bad as alcohol. And alcohol can be pretty bad, and we'll get into that too. Um, Around here in Minnesota, I know that kind of the opioid epidemic has been a big deal throughout a lot of the country. And, we've certainly suffered from our share of opioid use here. I've dragged people unconscious out of cars. I remember one time pulling a guy out of the bed of a truck after his friends pulled up to the hospital, like, my friend's not breathing. Okay, did he do any drugs? I don't know. He did. And of course, pull him out of the truck, you throw him on a bed, you bring him into the trauma room, he gets Narcan, he wakes up, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "Oh, I didn't do any drugs." I bet you did know, didn't you? Of course you did. Don't, when you're in the hospital, don't lie. Don't lie to the doctor, no matter how embarrassing your story might be, because that's how you get yourself killed. When the doctor doesn't know what's wrong with you and you're lying about it, they might treat you in a way that is not appropriate for what's actually going on with you, and you could die. Don't die. It's bad for you. Um, but in my experience, at least, the big issue here is methamphetamine. And maybe that's just because people that are on meth tend to behave worse, and therefore security gets involved more. I don't know, but I've seen a whole heck of a lot more meth people than heroin people. But well, I'll tell you about one guy. We used to have a guy who come in all the time. I haven't seen him in years now. I don't know what happened to him, but he would come in constantly, high on meth, freaking out, seeing things that weren't there. And it got to the point where he was diagnosed with permanent meth induced psychosis. Meth induced psychosis is something that happens to a lot of people that use meth. They become psychotic. This particular individual, used enough meth for enough time and was probably genetically unfortunate enough to the point where the meth use caused him to be psychotic forever. Don't use meth and become psychotic forever. It's bad for you. And some of the stuff that this guy would say, he was in his room and you'd be freaking out and you'd go in there, "Hey, what's going on?" "Oh, the blood people are coming under the door." Folks, I don't know what blood people are. I don't want to know what blood people are. Don't use meth and meet the blood people. That sounds terrible. Um, and of course, that type of person ends up using all kinds of resources, and they're a burden on society, at least while they're using, and in some cases, forever. Um, Alcohol, not that much better. It really isn't. And I mean, obviously, look, I know there's plenty of people out there, they drink, now and then socially, they maybe have a glass of wine before they go to bed. Fine, whatever. Again, it's something that I don't do. I don't drink. I have no desire to drink. If you want to do it responsibly, I really don't care. And that's your deal. When I start caring is when you manage to be hammered drunk in public and there's no one to take care of you. And I don't just mean you've got bad friends that screwed you over one night when you were out drinking. I mean, you don't have any friends because you've been drinking every day to intoxication for so long that nobody wants anything to do with you. And there are plenty of people like that. There's a lot of homelessness that this all kind of intertwines with too. I don't really want to get into that because that is super complicated, social issues stuff. But I'll tell you that there's plenty of homeless people, not all, obviously, that they're alcoholics. And I don't know if they started as alcoholics and became homeless, or if they started homeless and became alcoholics. Probably there's a mix of both there. Um, but there's guys that I know by name when they walk in. Hey, Steve, or whatever. And, you can tell immediately they're drunk, they're stumbling around, they're slurring their words. And some of these alcoholic folks, their blood alcohol levels are atmospheric. And, I know one guy, he's not drunk really until he's like a point 0.3. If he's a 0.25, he's walking straight, he's talking normal, and if he's a 0.2, he might be going through withdrawals. Like, that's the point where he's at. He literally needs to be drinking alcohol, or he could have a serious medical problem. I'm not going to pretend to know about withdrawals that much either, except for that I've dealt with people going through them. And oh my goodness, those folks don't know where they are. There was one woman I remember dealing with. She's on the fourth floor of a hospital, right? And she's freaking out because why are all these strange people in her house? And so, I show up there, and sometimes people like that, when they see someone in a uniform, if they think that they're being wronged, they kind of latch on to us and go, oh, this person's here to help me. And that can be useful sometimes. But as soon as I started trying to explain to this woman, look, you're not at home, you're in the hospital. And at some point, stupidly, I say to her, look, go look out the window. Is your house on the fourth floor of a 7-story brick building? And she kind of glances out the window and she looks back at me, real suspicious. You're just trying to confuse me. No, that's not what I'm trying to do, but I can tell that you're certainly confused. And at some point, folks like that, you just arguing with them, they end up getting some meds to calm them down, and maybe they go have a nap, hopefully. But yeah, all that is to basically say that, one, drugs are bad, don't do drugs. Two, drugs are a real drain on the system. And for my non-American friends, I know that the American healthcare system is a little confusing. It's a little confusing for us Americans as well. But, people like that, the government is paying for their healthcare through one program or another. And so it is a social ill that costs the taxpayer money. In fact, just to bring up one more person, we have a regular who, my understanding is that in his lifetime, he's cost the taxpayers of this county well over $13 million just because of his drinking and getting picked up by the police and bringing him to the hospital, and he goes back out and gets drunk again and might end up back in the hospital later the same day. So we're not talking about, small change here. We're not talking about the cost of throwing a guy in a bed overnight. We're talking about medical treatment, you know, scanning his head because maybe he fell and hit his head. Maybe he, is complaining of pain in his arm where he fell down. Got to get an x-ray, got to get that read by a radiologist. Maybe he's going to fight with us, and then now we're going to have to give him meds. You know, it's not a simple drunk tank that you might envision from TV. This is like full on medical care plus some violence. It's not good for the hospital. It's not good for the hospital staff. It's not good for the patient either, because the lifestyle that they're living is going to shorten their life significantly, and there's very little that you can do about it. And I don't want to get into the courts and how you may or may not be able to force someone to get treatment and everything. The bottom line is there's not necessarily any good answers except for just encourage people that that might be dealing with addiction to seek help themselves before they end up in this cycle where maybe they're homeless, they got to go to the hospital, and then they go out and get high or drunk again, then they go back to the hospital, and it's not great. In any case, I'll cut myself off there before I go in any more circles. Thanks for listening. And if you liked any of this, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Ask any questions that you may have in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.